What's going on, everybody? This is now episode 13 of Sabres Chat, presented by Built in Buffalo. I am, of course, your host, Luka. Well, I was out this past weekend. It was a holiday weekend. Hopefully, everyone out there had a great 4th of July weekend themselves. I always seem to spend mine up in the greater Northeast. I have some acquaintances and great friends up there in the New Hampshire and Maine areas. It was a great weekend. Service is not the best. You basically got to find a spot with Wi-Fi in order to catch up on your whatever you're trying to catch up on. So when it comes to free agency and things like that, um, I caught up a little bit late, and stuff like that. I will say this, and we're gonna get into that, of course, tonight. But I just wanted to kind of dump this out since it's on the top of my head. I will say when July 1st comes, noon noon o'clock, noon Eastern happens, and free agency opens up, the signings start coming in, and at that time, actually, I was on a golf course, and I'm just randomly, I'd get a blip of service. Not enough to look at Twitter, not enough to pretty much open any other application, but just enough for iMessenger to work and to get some a text from some friend, from someone in a group chat, whatever it might be, on signings and what was going on in the world of the NHL. So just getting these dumps of information randomly was kind of enjoyable. I enjoyed it and things like that. But even though I may have not been active on Twitter with, up to date signings and everything like that, I promise you I was trying to keep tabs on as much as I could while also just enjoying my weekend. And on top of it, I love Twitter. I love social media and stuff like that. Of course, I can't get enough of it. But at the same time, I am one of those individuals where when I'm going somewhere, like in this case, going to visit friends up in the greater Northeast, enjoy a weekend. It is a vacation for me. And I try to cut off when it comes to trying to be on top of things like that. My colleague with Bill's Chat podcast and Bill's Chat Live and everything, Josh, he does a phenomenal job, of course, on our Bill's Chat Pod Twitter account at Bill's Chat Pod. And he was on vacation, for instance, a month ago, right around the time of my wedding, and I remember noticing that he was still tweeting even at that point. I respect the game. I respect the hustle. I'm just not that type of guy. That's also why I leave that Twitter to him, because he's a man on a mission, and he's committed to just providing everything for everyone that loves to follow along with us. So I appreciate that with him. But that's kind of me rambling on and everything like that. Let's get to the point of this show here. And of course, it's really free agency. There's nothing else to talk about when it comes to the Sabres, when it comes to the NHL as a whole. It's all about the Sabres, or all about free agency with the Sabres, because I'll be brutally honest. And if you listened last week in episode 12, where I kind of gave a couple names and what I felt about it, I wasn't exactly thinking that the Sabres were going to be ultra active in free agency. I definitely thought that they were looking to bolster the lineup with one, maybe two signings and stuff like that. And if you really look at what they did, that number is spot on. Looking at it here, and I'll get into detail in a second, you have two incoming impactful signings. You have a re-sign in a way, even though they were a free agent themselves, and then a couple what I will call minor signings. And I only call them minor because essentially they're not going to be a major impact when it comes to the Sabres and the NHL and everything like that. They're just going to be more for the organization and filling a hole that was there down in the AHL with the Amerks, and then even the ECHL with the Cincinnati Cyclones. If you weren't aware, the ECHL affiliate for the Sabres is the Cyclones. But essentially, what you got going on is all the initial free agency and the signings tonight. Well, if you're listening to this again, thank you so much. I always say that all the time, but today I will be going through kind of the few signings that have happened so far, and then my thoughts on what this then means for the lineup and the, what could happen from here situation with that lineup and this team leading up into the preseason, and eventually the games are going to be here. I mean, I am recording on the night of July 5th. You are listening to this at least on July 6th, the Thursday afternoon time. Hopefully you are. I appreciate it again once more. Whenever you're listening to this too, though, listening to this, wow, it's been a long day. I apologize. Essentially, it's we are 2 months away from preseason. The games themselves about 2.5 months, and then next thing you know, in 3.5 months, the regular season. That Thursday night home slash season opener against the New York Rangers, which I will be at with my lovely wife and anyone else that is in town as well. I do have some out of town friends that potentially will be coming in for that. That will be here. That game will be here, and it's not even 3.5 months. It's basically 3 months, if I remember correctly. That is October 12th, 11th or 12th. I believe it's the 12th. So we are essentially 3 months away. So we have a good idea right now after these signings that I'll get into a second on what this roster looks like, especially with one unit, of course, and then what can be happening from here. So leading right into it, no more tease or rambling on here. If you have lived under a rock and you are listening to this and you are first hearing it from me, really honored, to be honest. That's awesome. But at the same time, I'm not expecting that. So I'm just going to give a quick overview here. The incoming signings, the impactful signings that Kevin Adams, Don Granato, and the Buffalo Sabres have decided to make are two right-handed defensemen. Of course, in the thumbnail, I even put in right defense, in quote, the right part in quotations. The reason being, both of these individuals are right-handed defensemen. That was a clear, secret little need, and not even secret, not so secret need of this team, of the defensive unit, because when you looked at Dahlin, when you looked at Matthias Samuelsson, when you looked at Owen Power, those are all lefties. And then if you go down, you even have Labushkin, who's a lefty, and so on and so forth. So it's like there needs to be a right-handed defenseman, especially if you want to try to make the life of Owen Power a little bit easier. You get a more veteran or just a nice top four presence to pair up with him. And then if injuries were to come and stuff like that, you can do a lot of other things to move people around in positions to succeed. You don't just stack up a bunch of lefties based on just talent and hope to God it works because you have so many defensemen on their offhand. Now, in the case of Rasmus Dahlin, of course, he was drafted to be an offhand defenseman. That's where he's thrived. He was moved back to his offhand defensive spot here this past season and had a career year and was unbelievable. And I expect him to live on the right for a long, long time, for probably his entire career, because that seems to be, of course, where he thrives. Some defensemen are that way. If you listen to a lot of defensemen that currently play or have played in the past, they always tell you it's just a lot easier to play your position on your hand rather than off of it. So if you are a left-handed defenseman, of course, being on the left is just a lot easier when it comes to playing off the boards, passing across to your defensive pair, things like that, moving the puck around. It just seems a little bit more natural and easier. So Kevin Adams goes out there, signs two right-handed defensemen, the first being Connor Clifton, formerly of the Boston Bruins, on a 3-year, $9.99 million contract. A lot of reports out there, $10 million. It's basically effectively the same thing, but 3.33 annual value in that contract. And then the other being defenseman Eric Johnson, formerly of the Avalanche, 1 year, $3.25 million contract for him. And these are two individuals I didn't have on my I have them on my watch list, but they make a lot of sense. One, and two, both of these individuals check more than just the right-handed defenseman box, I guess we'll call it. In the sense of Eric Johnson, it's a lot more clear cut to me. You have an individual who won a cup just 2 seasons ago. You have an individual who's been around. He was a first overall pick by the Blues. He's a big physical defensive defenseman, kind of just a sit at home, do his job, do the dirty work when needed, get off the ice. He's not exactly going to be logging you, 25, 26, 27 minutes a night, but he's going to do a great job getting you 20 to 22 minutes a night. And I'll get into it in a little bit here, but he seems like the perfect guy to kind of be mentoring an Owen Power like individual, because there is so many similarities with them. Now, Owen Power can skate and move well and move the puck around, has a great shot, things like that. Eric Johnson at one time did have all those things himself. He's just, of course, at an older age at this point where he doesn't move like he used to and stuff like that. But that is absolutely fine. I will get into a little bit more detail with him. I just want to move on. Now there's Connor Clifton, and him being signed is awesome. I love the signing. I actually, honestly, I didn't even see him on the free agent list, and that's my bad. I just an overlook because if I saw him there, I definitely would have checked him as someone I would be very interested in. I think he's an incredible skater and can move the puck so well. I think what Connor Clifton though does is just really gives you yet another really reliable defenseman when needed in any position in any point in the lineup. And now I'm going to kind of talk about both of these guys as a group because a lot of individuals I see out there are calling for Connor Clifton or just assuming Connor Clifton will be the pairing for Owen Power. And that may eventually become the case. Connor Clifton is here on a 3-year deal that could be coming, say, later this season, if not next season. I wouldn't be surprised, though, the point I brought up about Eric Johnson, if Eric Johnson starts in that top four as the right sided pair of Owen Power on the second unit and kind of just really helps Owen Power evolve even further in his game and really develop further and just kind of bring him to another place by giving him that mentor blanket like just reliable play with him where Owen Power doesn't feel the pressure of everything around him. It kind of takes a lot off of his shoulders. And Eric Johnson, for that matter, is a leadership on the blue line that we didn't have last season, that he should be able to help all the other individuals out. He has a ton and plentiful amount of experience and just kind of battle tested and knows what it takes to win it all, what you need to be doing in December just as much as you need to be doing in March, and so on and so forth. That I think him being paired up with Owen Power and just showing you what it takes out there early, if not the entire season, is maybe, in my opinion, what could be potentially happening. And then on top of that, what you then are doing is you are taking a guy who probably could warrant that top four spot in Connor Clifton and then sliding him down with an individual such as then Labushkin or, whoever else you are plugging in that spot, Corey Stillman, so on and so forth. And it's not like you feel like that third pair is a detriment compared to the other two units. And now you need to be playing Darlene 28 minutes a night with Matthias out there and then Owen Power out there with, say, Eric Johnson and or Connor Clifton in this matter for another 25, 26 minutes a night. And then your third pair is essentially just kind of a 10-15 minute afterthought, whatever the math turns out to be in that case, whatever it might be. It's like you have three solid day one lines that you can trust individuals out there to do their jobs and do them at a very high level. And I felt like that third pairing, when you had a Jacob Bryson or, if it was Labushkin with, say, Corey Stillman and stuff, it's like, it's not that they were bad. It's just there was a noticeable drop off. And maybe what this does is closes that gap a lot and significantly and just kind of brings it where now you can go three deep. And then, of course, depth is always a thing. And it's like you can't have enough depth and so on. So, well, I mean, you can literally have too much depth because in this case, now you are 9 deep. If I'm doing the math right, you have 6. Yeah, you are 9 deep currently on defense. And there are going to be some outgoings from the blue line that is currently under contract with the Sabres. And I will get into that in a second. But overall, now that's a good problem to have. It's been a long time since we have looked at a Sabres roster going into a season and been like, we have a very solid 6 defensemen, even with a decent 7th that we can feel comfortable when rotated in, when needed, based on injury, so on and so forth, to bring in and kind of steady the ship. And it's not like a Matthias Samuelsson just kind of pulled that out of my head because he got injured early on last season and it seemed like it was going to be a massive detriment, which it was in some capacity. But that happens and it's not like all of a sudden a massive skill gap is almost exemplified due to one injury. You now can go 6-7 deep and feel okay with your lineup moving forward, if not very okay. So the points I want to make with these Eric Johnson and Connor Clifton signings are, Don't assume Connor Clifton is the guy with Owen Power. Don't be surprised if Eric Johnson is that guy, at least early on. Maybe they try to play around with it and eventually Connor Clifton will be that guy. I just really do see a world, though, where Kevin Adams and Granato are almost making a point for Owen Power to be paired up with Eric Johnson off the ice, on the ice, and everything in between, and just kind of learn and absorb and just see what it takes to be that style defenseman. And I'm not saying Owen Power needs to sit back and become a defensive style when it comes to the skill base. It's just the stuff between the ears, the things that Eric Johnson has is just so much for Owen Power and only a benefit for him. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that pairing. And then you have a Connor Clifton with Labushkin, and then you have a Corey Stillman and or Yoki Hairu as your seventh, and those guys are rotating in. Not that they would probably enjoy that, especially Yoki Hairu that sake. And I'll probably bring him up in a little bit later in this episode, but you know, it's a great problem to have. And then these two signings, just real quick, what does that mean for the lineup? It means Jacob Bryson, if you didn't already think he had a foot, if they were trying to shop him, it really seems like his days are numbered with the Sabres. I'm expecting to see Bryson moved for whatever it is. I do believe Bryson deserves to play in the NHL. It's just not going to be for the Sabres anymore, unfortunately. But then you could also see an individual like Yoki Hairu moved because one, it's nothing against him. It's just now you have a bottleneck of defensemen. Yoki Hairu's he's still a young, very good puck moving defenseman. I think at times he's a defensive liability, or at least showed it with the Sabres this past season, where play was able to get behind him somewhat on the easier side at times. I still think that's just. I mean, he's 24, I believe, at this moment. He might be 25 by season start, whatever it might be. That comes with time and experience and everything like that. You got to play. It's just there's clearly a shift in focus on what this defensive kind of core needs, what Granato and Adams envision for the blue line, and what they want for this team on that blue line. And it just maybe Yoki Hairu has found himself on the way out or on the outside looking in, and now they traded for Corey Stillman this past season during the season. And to me, Corey Stillman kind of fits that seventh defenseman mold and role and what they are looking for potentially more so than Yoki Hairu moving forward. So I wouldn't be unhappy. I personally, I think Yoki Hairu has proven more than a Corey Stillman. And I think that if they were to say move Corey Stillman or just try to, get him to clear waivers and send him down, I wouldn't be surprised by that by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know how well that'll go, but overall, um, Yoki Hairu might even just find himself looking at the outside, looking in, and just be like, I want to go elsewhere and play. And Yoki Hairu could definitely be a guy you could ship, or package even for something. And again, I might get into that later, just as kind of a theoretical conversation or just a theoretical thing, mainly because I heard it elsewhere and it kind of sparked kind of a thing in my head where I'm like, I do like that idea. I do like the idea of something. But anyways, I love what Kevin Adams did with the defenseman, the signing of Connor Clifton, of Eric Johnson, and everything like that. That is, of course, the big news of free agency with the Sabres. And overall, I give it a grade, honestly, of a B plus. It's not an A just because I don't think it's kind of franchise changing. I don't think it's immediately like this is the blue line. This is going to fix all our problems. We're going to make the playoffs. But it has definitely bolstered that blue line. It has definitely improved the defensive unit of this team significantly enough that I think that has done an incredible job with giving me confidence that goaltending can improve behind it and forward play can hopefully learn how to play. That's the one key there where it's like if they can just figure out how to play a little bit more of a two-way game, a defensive game a little bit better rather than the running gun and just ignore the defensive side of stuff and expose that blue line as much as they did last season. This could be a serious team, and this is a turning point within free agency that bringing in Connor Clifton, bringing in Eric Johnson, filling those holes that were kind of there, and definitely the most significant holes, I believe, on this team. Very well done by Kevin Adams. B plus for me. I like it a lot. I like everything that happened there. I think that this is something that, looking back during this season, we are going to look at very positively and view as the turning point of hopefully ending this drought, as that is the expectation going into this year. I mean, it's playoffs. This is a playoff, make the playoffs or bust kind of season. And, you hear it everywhere. And I do believe that to be a fact. So, you have those two incomings. You also have kind of an incoming by re-signing, even though they're a free agent. That is forward Tyson Jost, of course, 1 year, $2 million. I like the signing. I'm not going to say I like it a lot or anything like that. I do think Tyson, when he came in, I believe we claimed him off waivers, of course, this past season. After, I believe it was Minnesota put him over on waivers. He was with Colorado the previous season. Um, I thought he played his role very well. He moved up and down the lineup. He was a center primarily, though, for the fourth line. He centered Gergensen and Okposo a lot. And overall, I thought he did a very solid job. It's not anything to, go home bragging about, but at the same time, I didn't think he was any sort of detriment. I didn't think he was some glaring issue with the lineup. And what Tyson Yost to me does is kind of bringing him back is just clearly something that shows Granato liked the way he played, liked what he did with this team. The team likes him himself. I do believe Okposo, which, going back to it real quick, I will do that. Okposo plays a role, or the leadership core, I should say, plays a role, just at least getting the message across of what they feel like with this team and things like that. And then you have other things that have been publicly known where Okposo had conversations with Eric Johnson, who he has a relationship with, and that was part of bringing in Eric Johnson. Just also, side note, Connor Clifton, shouldn't have been a surprise. The reason I love Jordan Greenway so much and had the link there during the trade deadline and expected that to happen was that Don Granato had worked with him at the U.S. development camp. There's also that link with Connor Clifton. So it shouldn't be overly that big of a surprise and things like that. But Tyson Yost clearly has a rapport with both the coaching staff with Kevin Adams, and they like what he does there. And then the team himself, or the team has good things to say about him because they wouldn't bring him back if it wasn't, things like that. But I also don't look at Tyson Yost as anyone that's going to kind of take away a spot for sure for the likes of Rusek or a Kulich going into the season. Now, I don't believe Yuri Kulich is going to be on the radar for Granato and Kevin Adams when it comes to making the roster day one of this season. He's still young. I do believe that they're probably going to want him to develop. It's not like he blew up insanely. He had a very, very good year with the Amerks. I believe he had over 20 goals. He had over 40 points, things like that down at the Amerks. Great. He was still an 18-year-old kid. He's turning 19. He will be 19 this season. I mean, if he blows them out of the water in preseason, if it's basically you can't send him back down, great. That's a great problem to have. I just think he is not exactly kind of written in pencil to make the day one lineup. Now, a Lucas Rusak, that is a guy that potentially should make the lineup and things like that, especially with the Jack Quinn injury unfortunately happening. Just quick side note, of course, if you were not aware, unfortunately, Jack Quinn did suffer an Achilles. I don't know if it was ruptured or complete tear. I just know it was an Achilles injury that required surgery, and he has a 4 to 6 month turnaround with that. That is, of course, meaning being that I just mentioned that the start of the season starts in 3 months. He's going to miss a good chunk of the first half of the season, if not the entire first half of the season. The 4 months would be great because then you just miss the month of October, essentially. But speedy recover. It's a big blow for the Sabres. But overall, this Tyson Yost signing kind of helps fill those things where then you bring up a Lucas Rusek to kind of start on that third line wing opposite Greenway and centered by Middlestat. You bump up an Olofsson to that second line where Quinn was, and Tyson Yost is just your fourth line center. Once Quinn comes back, you shuffle things around potentially a little bit. Maybe he's the odd man out, whatever it might be, but he can kind of fill that role very well. I think he does a good job with it. Overall, nothing to complain about. 1 year, $2 million. They just a touch overpaid Gergensons. They just a touch overpaid Okposo. They're all 1 year deals. They have the cap space to do so this season. Things can happen. It's absolutely okay. I have no qualms with this re-signing, bringing him back. I think Tyson Yost does the job that they require of him well enough that there's nothing to be upset with there. The other two signings that happened in free agency, just to go over them really quick, are two goaltenders. These are the lesser impact signings that I mentioned earlier. You have Devin Cooley coming in to the organization, things like that. And then also the return of Dustin Tokarski. He did go somewhere else last season. He was with the Sabres organization 2 years ago, of course, if everyone remembers. He is coming back. They both signed 1 year, $775,000 contracts. These are individuals that I expect to kind of fill the holes that have been left within the Amerks and Cyclones by Subban and Michael Hauser, who were filling in spots with the Amerks and Cyclones respectively. So overall, that's where those signings go. These shouldn't be major. I would hope these aren't major impact signings for the actual Sabres themselves, because you do currently still have three goaltenders on the Sabres signed and expected to be within the organization around that time. That is Eric Comrie, that is Devin Levi, of course, and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. So those are the three individuals you'd expect the Sabres. One injury, you're going with the other two. And then it's like, you really hope that Dustin Tokarski doesn't need to be called up or anything like that. Injuries happen, of course. We experienced that with the Sabres a couple seasons ago. It could happen. That would really suck if it happens, but you have at least a guy who's familiar with the organization, familiar with a lot of guys with the team, the coaching staff, and so on and so forth, and Tokarski. So um, it's not like I'm going to evaluate the signings. I just think you got to fill those holes, you got to fill those roles, and why not do it with a familiar name? Tokarski gets to extend his career, everything like that. Good on him. So those are the 5 overall signings, things of that nature. What does that mean for this Sabres team moving forward? Where do the Sabres go from here? What can be done? Is anything else going to happen? Stuff like that. To start, what I will say is I wouldn't rule out any further moves, but I would say that, of course, two right-handed defensemen, impact defensemen, and bolstering that blue line to the point of, like I discussed earlier, is a clear-cut sign that that is the unit that it's going to be. In a story on NHL.com by Jordan LaBarber, he even quotes out the Kevin Adams quote as well. Or sorry, let me apologize. It is a Don Granato quote during a presser where it's we now have a group that, in my opinion, when the games start, the 6 players can play with anyone. That quote essentially means I love the 6 that we will have on day 1 on paper right now. Hopefully none get hurt until then. And they believe that those 6 can compete with any team in the National Hockey League. And I tend to agree with them. Are they the best 6 in the league? No. But you have unbelievable high-end guys like a Dahlin, the high-end potential of an Owen Power, Matthias Samuelsson, very, very good defenseman in his own right. Um, Eric Johnson still has some game in him, of course, but he's going to be even more impactful off the ice and in the dressing room than on the ice, but he can still be an impact on the ice. And then Connor Clifton definitely is something that I think will fit well with this team and what they like to do on the blue line. I wouldn't expect, of course, anything to happen with the blue line. If anything happens with the blue line, you will see the likes of Bryson and or Yoki Haru and or potentially Stillman. I would be shocked a little bit more because they did trade for Stillman, but regardless, you don't know. There is a little bit of a bottleneck there and things of that nature. You did just sign Ryan Johnson, of course, although, expectation was for him to just be down in the minors at the Amerks. Regardless, you now have a plethora of blue liners after signing those two where you're going to see some outbound rather than inbound. No problem with that whatsoever. With all of that said, I don't look at goaltending potentially as something that they're going to absolutely still want to go after. But forwards with the Quinn injury become a little bit more interesting, but difficult at the same time. So where I'm going with that is before the Quinn injury, it really seemed like Kevin Adams and the Sabres and Granato were willing to send Olofsson elsewhere in either just a deal in itself and or a package for something in return where Olofsson could go get the playing time and be the player that he is for someone else. And the Sabres just get something more of what they need instead of Olofsson, whether it's, the forward or they did address defensive holes and needs that they had prior to the signings. Post Quinn injury, Olofsson doesn't seem like a guy that they're going to actively shop anymore. They might wait until the trade deadline now. I do believe that he would be a trade deadline guy now. It just, I do think that they're going to want to eventually sign him. It seemed like Kevin Adams was pretty transparent with all of that. It seems like Olofsson was an individual that they love his game and they like what he is as a player. It's just potentially not anything that the Sabres need moving forward, and they want to fill that hole elsewhere. Whether it's youth that they want to bring up to fill that spot, or just bring in a different forward that can, make a different style impact for this team. That remains to be seen, of course, but I don't expect them to be moving Olofsson when it comes to like in the next few weeks or anything like that. The Quinn injury, I think, makes it where you would see Olofsson move up to the top six with Paterka and Cousins while Quinn is coming back from surgery and recovering even so that they have a bit of that high end talent. Hopefully like Olofsson can excel in that role. Of course, he is a goal scorer. He's got an incredible shot. Hopefully that line can make that work and everything. They don't need him to be forechecking. I think Dylan Cousins, of course, does a phenomenal job at that. Paterka's a little bit of a bug himself. I'm not saying he's overly physical, but he's got high energy to him where Olofsson, who kind of sits a little bit more, kind of is just looking for the shot and the quick release and just is open for that. Dylan Cousins and Paterka are probably going to be able to make that work, or at least hopefully can. And it seems like that's where you could go. All of that then said, though, um, that third line right wing spot right now to me is something that I wouldn't be shocked to see something still happen for. Now, I don't know if that's via free agency. I don't know if that's an incoming free agent signing. It's not like they're going to sit there and be like, "Hey, Patrick Kane, we do have this right wing spot on our third line here. You want to come play with Casey Middlestat and Jordan Greenway?" I don't know if necessarily that's the way they're going to go about it. But all of that said, I talked about how they have this bottleneck on defense and things like that. And you're going to see a Jacob Bryson be moved out. You could potentially see a Yoki Hairu moved out just because they're not going to see their playing time here. You're not going to be able to put them on waivers. And what do you do? I mean, you can, but you're going to lose them in their contract and so on and so forth. Most likely, you would especially guess a guy like Yogi Hairu will absolutely be claimed. He is a phenomenal player. You would not put an individual like him on waivers, of course. So when you have something like that and you have this third line right wing spot right now kind of open due to Olofsson moving up for the Quinn role, and then kind of you have, as I discussed it, you have Gergensons, you have Jost, you have Okposo fitting in that fourth line, and you have Middlestat, who was an incredible he played a very, very, very good game last season. He was great on the ice. He obviously filled in that top line role when he needed to due to the Tage Thompson injury late in the season. But even on that third line with Olofsson on his wing, who is not exactly a guy who is doing any, back checking or forechecking and things of that nature, as I just mentioned. Middlestat was rated as one of the top 10 5v5 metric skaters in the entire league. He had incredible advanced metrics. I mean, just the eye test itself, Middlestat had a very, very good year. And now with an offseason as well, you'd hope to assume Greenway develops a little bit of chemistry with Middlestat, maybe feels a bit more comfortable with the team and fills a role with Middlestat that they need when it comes to the more physical nature to keep Middlestat a little bit more clean while also still being an offensive productive player himself. And now you need that third right winger. And currently, right now, if you were to ask me who's probably that day one third line right winger, I think it's Lucas Rusek. I believe if they were to start the season tonight or tomorrow or whatever it might be, at this point in time with who's under contract, I think Lucas Rusek is the guy. I think when he came up in his 2 games last season, he looked great. He had a great year on the Amerks. He, has kind of been doing his time a little bit here in the pro game the past couple seasons. He has developed and matured very well. And overall, it seems like he can be definitely a guy who's ready to make the next step. I know a lot of people like Yuri Kulich. I love Yuri Kulich. I just don't know if they necessarily are seeing him as a day one guy. They might want to see how he starts going in the AHL and things like that. And then maybe they move someone if he explodes then, or maybe if he does explode in the preseason and he's just too dang good to send back down to the Amherst, they keep him up at that point. But overall, if you ask me and, gun to my head, who is going to start on that third line right wing as of right now, I believe it to be Rusek. And I just look at it as only okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, the third line forwards to me were kind of the biggest issue outside of the obvious defensive uh, skill gap where, team defense overall and stuff like that. Our third line would get exposed all the time, even with the great play of Casey Middlestat. And when you have, excuse me, when you have a plethora of talent, and all these assets, your prospects, your kind of your 9 defensemen deep and things like that. If you could theoretically, I do apologize, I got a dry throat right now. If you could theoretically move the likes of a Yoki Haru plus uh, an Isak Rosen plus a pick to then bring in a guy from a team, excuse me again, from a team who is clearly rebuilding, like head to toe from the foundation, rebuilding, being the Flyers. And they have an individual, Travis Konechny, top 6 forward potential and everything like that. Coming off of a year, 31 goals, 30 assists, and 61 points in 60 games, I believe was his stat line. I didn't write that down. That's pretty foolish of me, but I remember seeing it early when I was just curious. His name was thrown around on another podcast, of course, and I was like, oh, wow, that's an interesting name to pull. I do like him a lot. He's still young. I believe he's going to turn 27 during this next upcoming season. He's currently still 26. He's, I believe, a 5.5 or $6 million cap hit this season. He's a $4 million cap hit next season, and then he is an unrestricted free agent after that. But if you could bring in a Yoki Haru, if you could bring in a Konechny to fill in that third line right wing role, a very good game, a very good two-way game, in my opinion, with high end scoring potential, while also willing to kind of be an energizer and be a really impactful winger for the likes of Middlestat and then Greenway on the opposite. And all it's going to cost you is a good young puck moving defenseman, Yoki Haru, who the Flyers would love, I'm sure, especially after moving Ivan Provorov, their best defenseman, honestly. Um, and then you can give them a nice forward prospect and Rosen, and then another draft pick for a guy like Konechny. That seems like a move to me that Kevin Adams, who's done an incredible job, absolutely incredible job turning this organization around to the point that it is while also maintaining a ton of assets. It's really hard for me to think of any other team right now that has a better asset pool, and that's prospects, young talent that's NHL ready or not, and then draft picks, of course, while also having cap space. It's like I don't know any other team that's done a better, has a better pool than the Sabres. And that's all a credit to Kevin Adams. That is all Kevin Adams doing. He's done an incredible job. And he wouldn't even have to kind of do an insane trade to make something like Konechny happen if it took something like that. Like Yoki Haru, as great and young and still a lot of career in front of him, as much as he has that, you've done something that you really don't see where his impact is going to be with the Sabres moving forward, unfortunately, at this point in time. And then you use something like him plus a good high end prospect. But again, prospects are projections. They are not a known that he's going to be a known great thing. He could potentially be an incredible thing. But you have Konechny, who has put up numerous 20 goal seasons. And even is coming off a 30-30 season with only 60 games played. That just that seems like a smart move to me. That seems like the right kind of move to me. And that is one that without spending too much, you are really putting this team in an incredible position now to get over that hump and finally make the postseason and even potentially be a legitimate team and player in that playoffs. You look at like the Panthers, and I don't believe the Sabres were close to the Panthers. The Sabres had to play the Panthers in a very key playoff like game at late in the regular season. And in that game, yes, it was a 2-1 game, but never did I feel like the Sabres, outside of probably the first 10 minutes, were a better team. I thought for the majority of that game and everything, the the Panthers were just a step ahead and they just a little bit more physical and just wanted it more than the Sabres and they just need a little bit more to push them to that spot to that they could do something like what the Panthers did last season, get into the dance and then become a major player moving forward. I think a guy like a Konechny could do something like that. I'm not saying they're going after Konechny for sure. That's just a name that I heard thrown out in a hypothetical in a podcast elsewhere. I'm sure others that listen to this, which I do one last time appreciate, also probably listen to that. And I thought that was a great idea and a great call out by the individual who made that call out. And it gets the gears turning when it's this time of year. That's the fun you can have. And overall, if you approach the Flyers with Yoki Haru, Rosen, and say second or third round pick, I don't know how GM Daniel Briere looks at that and says no when you're not bringing back a Konechny through this long rebuilding process, and you can kind of acquire a lot of assets and kind of future potential to help that rebuild moving forward for him. And it just seems like a great win-win trade if that's the asking cost for him, stuff like that. So just an idea to throw out there near the end of this episode. I just to wrap it up too, love the signings. Connor Clifton, I expect to be a great player for the Sabres throughout his entire 3-year contract. Eric Johnson, I think, is going to be a phenomenal signing for this upcoming season. I think both of those were great signings. Tyson Yost coming back is good in itself, and there's nothing flashy about it, but you don't need it to be that. And the free agency kind of surge early on to me met the expectations I would have liked them to be and some for this Sabres team. I think Kevin Adams handled July 1st beautifully. I think what he did then was perfect. And overall, very, very well done by Kevin Adams and the Sabres. And it just gets me more excited for the upcoming season. I'm sure it does with everyone else out there. I appreciate you stopping by and for another episode of Sabres Chat. I should be back next week and everything like that. Sorry, it's just a little under the weather and stuff like that, dry throat, things of that nature. Not sure why, but should be back next week for episode 14. Of course, I will tweet out any updates if anything changes. But for one last time, thank you for stopping by and listening to this episode of Sabres Chat. You all have a great day or evening whenever you are listening to this. I am Luka. One last time. Thanks for listening to Sabres Chat, presented by Built in Buffalo. You all have a great rest of your day.